Hey, welcome to the 99, a ministry of Crossroads Grace Community Church in Manteca, California. I'm your host, Heather Mahoney, and at the 99, our goal is to reach our ones far from God by equipping the 99 to follow Jesus more fully. Each week, we take time to lean into the weekend message at Crossroads by expanding further into the topic or concept in greater depth. We hope it challenges you and creates a hunger to dive into scriptures so you can know Jesus better. If you want to best engage with us, make sure to catch this weekend's message at crossroadsgrace.org/series or by downloading the Crossroads app. Welcome, Brian. Hey, prayer before the polls was a wonderful way to start our election day.
Wasn't that cool?
It was actually really cool.
I mean, it was a little nutty getting up that early to kind of like get the voices warmed up and stuff for our team, but man, it was so cool. And I saw families coming in.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, did you see some families coming in and different people?
Oh, yeah. I saw families coming in that weren't even coming from Manteca, so they're having to travel 30 minutes to make it happen. I saw just people all across the board coming, and it was really cool.
Well, and that one family had 4 kids, I think, or was it?
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah, a lot of kids.
Yeah,
so.
and I saw parents coming in solo with a boatload of kids and doing it all on their own. And I don't know how they did that all to be here at 6 a.m., but what a great way to start a day that I think just had a lot of anxiousness to it.
Yeah. My favorite image, actually, I was sitting with my family, and Janelle came in with her little daughter, and she was in super front row, like on the side, but she was like doing her hair for school while they were worshiping, and it was just so cool. And so little Willow was there, but to your point, I think it just set people's hearts the right way, and it set people as I know it did mine, at least, and maybe selfishly it was just for us. So it was really nice of them to do it for us, but we, going to the polls, I just felt differently, and I was able to just take a deep breath and know that God was in control and remember some of those worship songs. And ultimately, that's probably what we should do every day, but we can't do that every day corporately. Yeah. But man, I'll tell you what, setting your hearts towards Christ before you start the day is really, really good idea.
No, I loved it. And you know what? We're even mail-in voters, but it was still like, well, we're waiting to hear what's coming next. We're all, we all get the one vote, but you don't know what everyone's one vote together looks like. So I enjoyed the trust in Jesus and the calm before, the media storm.
Well, and we don't do that. We don't give ourselves permission to push pause and pray. And so even just maybe it's giving people the opportunity for the space to do that was something pretty special. So it was great. And I mean, the election happened, and here we are, and we're moving forward, and God is still on his throne. Nothing has shaken him.
Yeah, Christ is still king.
Yes.
Christ is still king. Hey, thanks for joining us again today. I know last week when we were on the 99 podcast, you actually mentioned that kind of painstakingly you had not yet written your message. You felt like God was asking you to wait. He was telling you to hold on. So there's probably a lot of angles in which you really could have started to prepare for this weekend's message that we just had, and you really had to pick a lane. And usually you're just such a planner. So I have to know, what is like an angle or two that you didn't go with that was in your brain, but you realized, hey, I'm waiting. And then you didn't end up like taking us down that route for this weekend's message.
Well, I said that, hey, I don't have anything written. And I don't have anything written that I wrote, but Paul was gracious enough to have Romans 13 pre-written. So we knew we were going to be in that text. So part of the reason that it's when you think of something as broad as the election, it's like there are, to your point, so many routes you could take. And the one that we took, obviously Romans 13, continue to look through that. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But one of those angles, well, honestly, was Joshua 24. And you probably have heard this before. You might even have it over your kitchen table. It's but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
Oh, we have it at our house.
I bet you.
Someone made us the sign.
See, and you're welcome, right? So
thank you.
Yeah, Brian. I don't think I didn't make that, but anyway, I mean, like that's one of those verses that it's like it's an anthemic verse for a family, right? Hey, this is what we're doing. We're rallying and we're going to serve the Lord no matter what. And what was interesting about that and why it kind of resonated with me, this whole election thing, is we oftentimes take those out of context and we just pluck it out and we kind of pry it out like a pearl out of a shell, and we say, look at what we found. And the reality is there's so much around it that's important for context with it. So do you have any verses like that you just are like, man, I love it, but sometimes people take it out of context, or ones that kind of stick with you. Maybe like Jeremiah 29:11 or something.
Oh, Jeremiah 29:11. What's the one like wherever 2 or 3 or more are gathered in his name? But then you miss the whole backstory and you're like, wait, this is a great nugget of wisdom, but it's actually not written to Heather in Manteca, California in 2024. Let's actually check out the context to it.
Yeah. Well, it's almost kind of the lazy man's looking at scripture, because it's a quick Instagram post that looks really good and you could put a fuzzy background on it. You're like, huh. But then if you look at it deeper, you're like, huh. It's a totally different way of looking at it. And I think, Joshua 24, if you look at the context of it, it really actually speaks to us when it comes to this election cycle, believe it or not. And I thought it was really, I think, impactful. So if we reverse back to Joshua 24:1, we get, that was my bad attempt at a reverse. But
it sounded natural.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
The people are going to love it.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you love that, put in the comments that you loved it, and maybe it makes it into a sermon. But anyway,
oh gosh.
So Joshua 24, verse 1, it really sets the pace for the whole until we get to 15. So it says, then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel of Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. So I think we needed some context within this context of what we're talking about. So we have Joshua, and what's your feelings on Joshua? That guy's pretty cool in the Bible.
I mean, there's just like so much Dudley stuff that happens, and God just uses him in such big and mighty ways.
Yeah.
It's hard to not say he's wonderful.
Well, I can't imagine taking over from Moses. Like, that's a big deal.
I do not want that responsibility.
You always want to be the second guy, right?
Yes.
I know for me, like, I was intimidated taking over for Pastor Mike here at the church, and I thought, wow, man, I maybe I should have been the third guy. I'm not the second guy.
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Have an in-betweener.
Yeah. I thought, maybe Sean, your husband, would be a good like in-between, but
oh gosh.
But he decided not to. But that's okay.
Sean loves the people, but he does not want to preach.
But anyway, so Joshua, he's the new leader of the Israelites. He took over from Moses, who again, you have to say it as Moses, but to be able to know who it really is. Let my people go. He was the one that took over for him, and he led them into the promised land, which is the promised land they had been promised by God all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so now they're receiving it, and they fought all kinds of battles. He was their leader. So when we come into 24, I mean, Joshua's been through some stuff. Like when he's assembling the tribes of Israel at Shechem, he was a part of establishing the tribes of Israel. So this is a big deal for him. And he's asking them to present themselves before God. And then he goes into this really like this monologue, because Joshua's getting to the end of his life, and we know people at the end of their life, they just want to rattle off what they've done and give you some last bit of wisdom for that. And so Joshua 24, starting in verse 2, it says, Joshua said to all the people, now remind you, all the people is the people we just talked about. He says, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him through Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac gave Jacob and Esau, and I signed the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. So just in those few verses, you get a chance to hear a lot about what Joshua did. I mean, he's taking us all the way back to the very beginning and showing us God's faithfulness. He's like, hey, let's remember Abraham. Remember Father Abraham had many sons. We sang the song last time.
Yes.
And then from Abraham, then we got his son Isaac, and from Isaac came Jacob. And that's where in the Bible you hear, right? He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? That's that lineage that we're talking about. So he's taking them all the way back to say God has been faithful all the way back to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. And then he continues in verse 5. He says, then I sent Moses and Aaron. And I'm sure Joshua's like, oh, I know those guys, So then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there. And I brought you out. I love that he points to the people. He says, I brought you guys, you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. Now, when you read the Bible, isn't it interesting how this Exodus story comes up over and over and over? Like, have you ever noticed that in Scripture where it's just like, haven't we talked about this a lot? Like, I mean, you ever noticed that before?
Oh yeah, there's a thread throughout a lot of what's going on. And another thing that sticks out to me too is when in the Old Testament it says the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, because then sometimes I'm like, doubting that God could do something now. And then when I look back historically, he's like, from the beginning of time, I have been faithful to all these people. And that's probably part of the reason they're even bringing up the Exodus and all that, because he brings them through to the other side of that.
Yeah, it's and what's so good about the Exodus, and I always think, when he talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like it's almost like remember in math when you're thinking of of pi, like it's 3.14, and you only remember the three numbers, keep going. I think that's like the biblical version of pi, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it keeps going, believe me. But we'll just stop there. But then the cool thing about the Exodus story, it is brought up over and over and over, and you can see that as a super important part of the history of Jews. Even today, they continue to talk about this Exodus moment, and it's a sentinel moment for them in their history. And you said it. I mean, it shows God's faithfulness at really its ultimate test for those people to remember. 400 years of slavery. Moses comes in and says, "Let my people go." He fights him with all the plagues, and Pharaoh's finally like, "Get out of here." And it's it's a defeat of evil. It's the defeat of evil. And next to the Holocaust, I would say this is one of the more prominent moments in Jewish history where it's a much more anthemic, great moment in history. But you see like the Exodus and then the Holocaust, and now sadly October 7th has kind of come into the lineage of that. But these moments where you say, man, God showed up and God was a part of something even when it was difficult and even when you're in your darkest time. And so we should pay attention to that when we read in Scripture. When you hear something over and over, there's something there. And so Joshua makes sure to talk about that. Then in verse 8, he says, listen, then I brought you to the land of the Amorites who live east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you, and you took possession of the land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Man, he says it twice. Isn't that great? Then you crossed the Jordan. You came to Jericho. The cities of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, the Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, and Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Thank you very much. Pause for applause. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the two Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from the vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now, what does that say to you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when I read that, it's just like, okay, God, you fought our battles, right? Like you're the one, and I love that Phil Wickham song, like when I fight on my knees, like that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, so
with
good.
My hands lifted high.
Yeah. And it's this idea of complete surrender by us, but total confidence that he's in control and doing all this work. And so when he rattles off all of that stuff, like to think of all of the people that he defeated for them, and when he says, but I gave them into your hands. So sure, they were probably in the battlefield, but they shouldn't have won those. And he gave that to them. And then to say like, hey, you got land you didn't deserve, that you didn't earn, cities that you didn't build, you're living in fruit, you're eating in fruits that you didn't grow. Like he's like, this is how much I want to bless you. I mean, for you, like, as you think about that, like, isn't that crazy to think about?
Oh, that's absolutely crazy. And it's so easy. I think it's just reminding me that I can get stuck in the current battle that I'm in, and all I can see is right there in front of me, versus taking that step back, looking at just thousands and thousands of years of faithfulness that is recorded.
Yeah.
That is not, that goes far beyond the life of the Mahonies, of God providing for his people, and it's never deserved. And that his grace and his mercy continue to be real and displayed over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And why would we doubt it? Right. Why would we doubt it?
Well, and what's even more beautiful about this, we don't have to go back thousands of years. We just need to go back to like yesterday.
Oh, absolutely.
Be able to see like, man, God showed up there. But isn't it so funny?
My life's not in print though, so it's easier sometimes to pull from.
Yeah. Well, maybe it should be in print. Maybe it should
I don't think the people need that. It's not going to help anyone.
But what's interesting that I think is like we forget so quickly. Like our memory is so fragile of you get in the storm, you're like, God, you're never going to show up. Then he shows up and he does the thing. And then you're like, man, God, I can't believe it. And then like 45 seconds later, you're like, God, where are you? How could you do it? You completely forgot about this big thing he's done. And so I think what Joshua is doing here, and I know it's what he's doing, is he's building this case of God's faithfulness. He rewound the tape all the way back to Abraham. And now he's like, hey, guys, I know you weren't around for Abraham, but you saw us work over the Amorites, and you were there for the Perizzites, and you know that you're eating food that you didn't plan. Like, you know about this. And so God is fighting battles for them. He's showing that no enemy is going to prosper against them. And he gave them what they did not earn or deserve, but yet he blessed them with it. Boy, could anybody say grace in the house today, right? It's an example of what he's doing. And so Joshua is building this huge case about the goodness and the greatness to the people. All of that to build to verse 14. We're not even to our verse yet. Verse 14, and he says, now listen, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt and serve the Lord. Now, this is so powerful, okay? He's saying, listen, if you remember all the way back to Abraham, he was the guy beyond the Euphrates River that worshiped all these other gods that weren't him. And then he's saying, remember all the gods that you worshiped in Egypt? He says, all of that stuff, forget about it. Like, just erase it. Serve me. Throw them all away. There's this invitation of God to the people, like, get rid of all the garbage that's just killing you. And you just come to me. And he's done all that, and he showed all that to them, and he's promised them all that. And he says, because of that, would you be faithful? Would you trust me in that? I mean, and for us, I mean, as believers in Christ, I mean, that is the ultimate test, isn't it? To believe that what God said he was going to do, he'll continue to do. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. It also makes me think of, what am I putting in, like, the priority, the number one spot in my life that's a bigger deal than who God is in my life. And, you know, during this crazy election season, all the stuff's going on. It's intense. It feels like a lot of chaos, and you've got over half of America happy, a lot of people not happy, but I'm like, what am I putting up there that I'm putting above God, or that I'm putting above Jesus, that I need to feel convicted to, like, restructure the priorities in my life, because I've got a faithful God who cares. And he said, I will show up and I will provide. And part of that requires me trusting and me not worrying so much that I'm putting something else above what he's saying he has to offer for me.
Yeah. And seeing that as a good thing.
And seeing that as a good thing.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people begrudgingly receive that from God. Like,
yes.
All right, fine, God, you're God, I'm not, you know, instead of saying, no, I want that. Like, give me more of that, and I want to be faithful to that. And so you asked me at the beginning, like, hey, how will you possibly tie this in the election stuff and everything? Well, gosh, I think it's the exact same thing that our world is being presented with right now.
Okay.
Like, it's the same invitation to us right now, no matter how you feel about the election, mind you. Whether you feel like you are top of the world or bottom of the bucket, God is saying, I've been faithful a long time. 45 seconds ago, yes, but to your point, thousands of years ago, like, at what point will you just kind of relinquish the need to say that I'm in control, and say, no, God, you're in control, no matter what's happening, right? It's the exact same thing. So he's saying, have faith in me. I mean, sure, your politician, the person that you wanted to be, didn't make it. Okay, have faith in me. Sure, it's great. The guy that you wanted in office is now in office. Great, have faith in me, right? He's saying, remember me in the midst of all of this, like you said, craziness and chaos. Please don't lose sight of me. Please don't lose sight of the fact that I am here for you, and I have a track record greater than anything else in this world to be able to prove that I am good. And that is where we come to verse 15. And then it says, and then again, after setting up all of this, all the history, and his last lines were, right, now fear the Lord and serve him with faithfulness. He gets to verse 15. He says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, man, those are hard words right there, then choose for yourselves this day whom you'll serve. Whether the gods of your ancestors serve beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. He's saying you can choose. Like, listen, if the Lord isn't for you, you've got free will. You've got complete, if it's undesirable, you got to choose, though. In which I think that's so important, because so many people say, you know what, I'm not going to choose. Like, I'm not going to believe in God, or I am going to believe in God. I'm somewhere in the middle. You do you, and I'll do me. And really, God's word says that's not how it works. You're either with me or against me. Like you're either serving the gods beyond the Euphrates or serving the gods of the Amorites, or you're serving me. Like you've got to choose. And he's saying, listen, I understand. Even despite all that's going there, you still have to make the decision. So if it seems undesirable, all the things God has done for you, I understand. You could choose. And then in the last line, this is the line that we started with. But as for me, now me, that's Joshua. Mm-hmm. He said, as for me, the guy that led you, as for me, the guy that was closest to Moses, as for me, the guy that probably had the closest access to God of anybody, right? As for me and my household, my family, all the people, we're going to choose. And here's what we're going to choose. We will serve the Lord. So I think that makes that sentence so much more powerful. Because if you don't have to build into that, it just seems like a pithy thing that you could say, me and my household, we're going to serve the Lord. Yeah, but what he had to build up to is that the reason we serve the Lord is because of the goodness that he has described to us, and that we don't deserve anything that he gives us, but he gives it to us freely. He fights our battles. He provides for us on and on and on. And he says, if you don't want that, that's fine. But as for me and my family, we're all in. Like we want to serve the Lord. I mean, how's that hit you?
Yeah, it's crazy that I think I would ever look at that and see anything other than an obvious yes. But the choice is still given, and there's still freedom in that, and we're still not robots. But the idea that I would look at that and be like, you're right. I'm not into somebody like caring for me in this grand of a way.
Yeah.
It's like all we could ever ask for or need. And I love that context you've given us to see just how powerful that verse really is. Because standalone, you're like, that's a good verse.
It's a good verse.
But when you hear the context, you're like, no, that's really great, because we're remembering God's faithfulness and his goodness to his people that he doesn't have to show us, that we haven't always been grateful for, yet he's still a good God who gives good gifts to his children.
When he's in control. I mean, it's his power that's on display.
When we can trust it.
Yeah, and we could, because it's been tested, and it can be trusted. I think those are two important things. Like, oftentimes we say, "Oh, well, I'll just you trust something on face value," but in reality, like you want to believe that it's going to work, right? So
absolutely.
So as if we can humble ourselves before the Lord and to be able to look at all the things that he's done, past, present, and future, then I think that we can remember his faithfulness, his goodness, his kindness, his blessing, and say, yeah, that's what I want. And you know what? I might have to say no to some things in my life that I like, but that are sinful, and they're not going to be the best for me, but I'm going to choose to say yes to his. But then he also says, or you can do your own thing. And that ultimately, I think, is the beauty in God's love, and also the most difficult part about God's love. Because we would love to say, well, gosh, let's just force everybody into God's love because that's the best thing, and we should know, come here, you.
Oh, what could be better?
But that's like being forced against your will. Like that's kidnapping somebody. You can't do that, you know? You go to jail for that. So God gives us that choice. And he's saying to us in 2024, saying, hey, I know there's a lot of stuff going on, but I am the God yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I'm going to be here. I'm here for you. I love you. I've got a track record a mile long. Trust me. Come on my side. Don't let the world eat you up. For you and your household, you serve the Lord, but you can choose. But I'm telling you, life is on my side. So it's pretty powerful. Again, that's another angle we could have taken, you know, and fun to be able to take it with you.
I agree. I love that. It's kind of reminding me of something that I was chatting with you about earlier, because I think maybe God's faithfulness hasn't been forefront for all of us. We've allowed ourselves to be swept up in the election, whether we agreed with it, whether we didn't agree with it. And I was telling you that I've got some people in my life that I care about who are having a really hard time because they've got friends in life who have voted differently, picked a different side of the fence. And, you know, there's a lot of choices, but really when we kind of come down to a two-party system, so there's kind of two choices. Their other ones aren't fake, but they don't always have the shot of winning. And so I just had someone in my life who was just so sad and so hurt because they had people in their life saying, hey, if you voted this way, you can just delete me from your life because that means you're not for me. That means you're against me. So what do you say to our church, to our community, to the listeners of the 99 podcast? How can we bring about unity and build bridges rather than hate and hurt?
Well, it's a big question, and it's not like the easiest because every individual is different, and so they have different things that have affected them in different ways.
Yep.
So we always talk about what do you bring into the party? I mean, when you come to the party, you bring in, when it comes to a relationship, all your past experiences, hurts, and all that. So it's hard to be able to say, well, here's the Band-Aid, just put this on everybody and they're going to be good. But I would bring us back to Romans, into Romans chapter 3, verse 8, which is one of the ones that we centered around this week, this idea where Paul says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Now, that I think is the crux of the entire conversation, really, is if we as Christians want to show our colors as being true to Christ, then the only debt we're going to carry against somebody is the debt to love them really, really well.
Okay.
So there could be a knee-jerk reaction for people to read those posts and say, oh, you want me out? Pfft, deuces. See, that's all, enjoy your next 4 years. We'll catch you the next cycle, or whatever you want to say. It's the easy way. And honestly, it's on the other side of the coin too. When people say those things, if you don't like me, get rid. That's the easy thing to say. The harder thing is to walk the long road of love with someone, and to say, even though I feel like you're bringing these hurtful things, and I'm going to choose to love instead. And let's also just keep in mind, like this, we're a few days after this whole thing has taken place. It's pretty raw, and we do know that everything will settle down, and what everybody thinks won't be what it is, and all of the things. So we just need to take a deep breath. And I would also come back to what I said last week in last week's sermon, that never ruin a relationship because of your passion for a politician. Like that should never happen, because they don't love you. Like they just don't. We have this image that for some reason when we vote for this person, that now they're part of our family. We're going to swap recipes with them, or we're going to swap gifts, and we're just going to be besties, and we're going to go to Taylor Swift concerts together in New Orleans, like all the things. But in reality, they don't know you. They don't care about you. But people that are near you, they do. They love you. So never distance yourself from somebody that truly loves you. And so if you want to have a debt with somebody, have a debt that's outstanding of, I just want to love you so well through these difficult times. And then sometimes when it comes to that, a good friend, I believe good friends are able to receive arrows and just pull them out, and just realize that they weren't meant to hurt, but they were probably meant just because they were hurting people, hurt people. So sometimes you're going to take a few arrows in relationships. We all do it in the best of marriages, the worst of marriages, the best of. There's going to be times where things are, sad, and they don't mean it, but in the passion of the moment they say it. And I think that if we can lead with love and know that is what we want to lead with, that we could probably endure a lot more than we think. And I wouldn't cut a relation off just like that because of one post. But I do think it's one of the biggest tests as a believer in Christ is how well can you love in the middle of difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that it's just a lot easier to be bolder behind a keyboard than having a conversation to someone's face. And what's happened is you miss all of the empathy, you miss the care and the love for one another. That's kind of why in texting, I don't really like having true discussions. I'm more about the practical information, the who, what, when, where, because it's really easy for me to write something with my heart one way, and then it's read by someone a different way. And maybe I intended it to be hurtful, maybe I didn't, but it's really hard to gauge how the other person will receive it, which is why when you have the time to be able to connect with somebody, that's a great way to love them well, is over a meal, or if you get to see them face to face, if you're lucky enough to live close to a good friend. But that's part of, I think, just what makes God's kingdom so good are the differences, is that we're not all the same, and that he has gifted us. He's made us in certain ways. We talked about this last week, that every person who's ever been made has been made in the image of God. And we have to remember that when we read or hear something that's hard or hurtful, or it feels that way for them.
Well, and you just said something that I think, so in our culture, there's this line that says that you should never discuss two things in public settings. You remember what they are? Like never discuss.
Oh yeah, is it like religion and politics?
Right. And so
yes.
we say that, and we say that to avoid. People will say it genuinely. Say, don't talk about those two things because it's going to hurt the relationship. It's going to be so don't do that. But could it be that that is exactly what Satan wants us to do? Is not to discuss religion and not discuss politics so that we become keyboard warriors, so that we never learn to talk with one another, so that we never can learn to disagree with one another. And instead we build up these little silos on the side where we just get pent up with all of our energy because all we are doing is in a think tank of people that think like us, because we've been told never talk about it with anybody except that you agree with, never talk about it in public places, right? I think that could be one of the evilest things Satan's ever done. Like, what if we actually did have a dialogue? And what if it was safe to talk about everything because it's a good thing? And what if in those conversations, because we're doing it face to face and not through texting, I can see your face and understand the pain that's on your face when you talk about certain things. Or I can hear the quiver in your voice when you talk about something, or the passion in your voice. Because when you get a text message, you get an email, you will read it in your head voice.
Agreed.
However you think that person is saying it, that's how they're saying it. And it's probably the exact opposite of how they're saying it. Right?
There's a really good shot that it is.
Yeah. So in there, I just think that I would just say always Christians should be different in how they deal with it. That the world should look at us and say, there's something different about it. But if we're doing the exact same thing as everybody else, why in the world would they be drawn to us at all? Like, why would they have any interest at all?
Agreed.
So for us, and I would say our next gen could be a perfect just opportunity of growth that can, if we can teach our next generation to have great conversations with each other.
Oh yeah.
If we can parent our kids that way, it's going to change things, because there should, if we are truly going to follow Christ, if there is no depth that we want other than love, then we should be able to talk with people in grace and truth in anything, and not say, I'll talk to you about everything except these two things. That's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. I even think of Jesus. Is it Zacchaeus? I'm thinking Zacchaeus was a wee little man.
He was a wee little man.
If you grew up singing that, if you had the pleasure of being in Sunday school as a small child, do you have something you want to add?
I mean, we've just quoted two of the most obnoxious songs in Christian music of all time. You guys are
right? Welcome.
You're welcome.
I don't know what to say for that.
Yes.
But Jesus didn't say, hey, change your life. He didn't say this. He didn't say that. He said, hey, I'm coming to your house for dinner.
Yeah.
He had a meal with him. And I think being willing to spend time with someone who's different than you is an important sign of maturity in a believer.
Yep.
And also being willing to ask questions rather than debate and make statements. Because if we are intentional about understanding other people, I think that's a great way to show love and care versus talking about self or pointing out why somebody else is wrong.
So
I don't even want to hang out with you if you're going to do that for me when it's not done in love, when I don't have that trusting relationship with you. It's
totally.
Yeah, that's a big jumping of the gun.
Yeah. Well, and I said this past weekend, if you remember, like, once we receive God's love, we can learn to love others. And when we love others, we can show them the love of God. So it's this trickle-down effect of we got to receive love. We then have to learn to love. We love others. And when we love, we're showing. We have to do it different. We just have to do it different. And not because your pastor's saying it or a podcast is telling it. It's because God is calling us to love differently. He says, they will know you are my disciples by your love. And so if we want more disciples, we got to love better.
Well, I think a great way to begin to wrap up our time together is another quote you said in your message. It's just been sticking with me. It's not a short quote. Be ready, people. But it says, when we see God's love as the answer to the darkness in our world, then we will see the light. Until then, we will be staggering around in the darkness, hoping that the next thing we bump into will be our Savior. We have to stop bumping our heads and instead hit our knees. We need to be ready to submit ourselves to the love of God that sets us free from our sins and that unleashes that love on the world around us.
Yeah, it's exactly what we were saying. We've got to do it differently, and we've got to love differently.
We've got to do it differently.
We do.
You
we just have
that
to.
up real nice.
Yeah.
As always, I want to thank you for our time together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone listening, if you have any questions or you want to be able to see today's show notes, just check out the details below and follow the links. What a great time. Brian, any final thoughts or sneak peeks or anything you want to give us as we wrap up this week's episode?
Well, I'd love to give you one more song to stick in your head, but I think 2 is enough. But
2 is enough.
Next week, we've got an exciting, unstoppable news to share. So you're not going to want to miss service. You want to make sure you're there for that. Unstoppable is our 2-year generosity initiative to impact the Central Valley and beyond for Jesus, and you won't want to miss what's happening so far. And then next week, we are going to look, check this out, Heather, we're going to look at one of the most frustrating things people say to pastors as Christians next week. Honestly, right now, it's making my blood boil right now, just even thinking of this phrase that I hear all the time, so be prepared for that. And then we're also going to look at how one intentional action can make our faith the most absolute rewarding possible thing in our entire life. One thing that's going to transform everything. So can't wait for you guys to join us. Make sure you're here.
Well, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know the answer to what makes his blood boil, so I'm ready for that one.
Hang on.
Be there next week, guys. So glad you joined us today. Tag, you're it. Thank you for joining us today for the 99 podcast. We hope to see you next weekend at Crossroads on campus or online for one of our 4 services. To view our service times, be sure to check out our website at crossroadsgrace.org.